Okay, so we've created the tentacles and the body of the squid, and now we're going to create a couple eyes, and we're going to use the lathe object to create a spline that we're going to then lathe around. And the lathe object is used to make things like wine glasses or bowls or pots or anything that you want a cross section that you can rotate around a center. And so to do that, we're going to go to a new scene. So I'm going to hit Command N or Control N to create a new file. Once I get there, there we go. Sorry, I was still in QuickTime. So I've created a new file, and I'm going to go and change my view to the front view. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And what I want to do is we're going to create these kind of disc-like eyes. They're going to be, somewhat flat, so they can attach to the surface of this thing, and they're going to look kind of weird, but it'll be all right. So we're going to use the Spline pen, and we're going to start, let's say, 4 little grid units out. And we'll have to scale this because we have no idea what the scale is going to be like. But we basically want to create something that has like a ridge that goes around the outside of it, like a kind of like a lid or something, and then the surface of the eyeball. And so to do that, we're going to start about 4 units out. I'm going to click once because I want this corner to be hard, but then I'm going to come up to this edge here. I'm going to click and drag, and I want to make sure I drag the right way, right? If I drag this way, that's not what I'm looking to do. I really want to be able to have this edge here. I'm going to come down here, and we're going to talk about, it's going to look really strange at first, and we'll talk about how to fix the issue that's going to come up in just a second. So I've clicked once there, and actually that may be the easiest solution, is just to click there to get a hard corner. I'm going to come all the way to the center here, and I'm going to click and drag a little bit. And you'll see that, and then I'm going to hit escape for the time being. Now you'll notice if I hover over this point, it allows me to basically continue from whichever point I started at, right? And what we're going to want to do is, since I didn't do this bottom edge here, we could leave this open, but I want to show you this option, right? When you have the spline tool still selected, you can hover over either end point of your spline to create new points from that point on. So I'm going to click once there, I'm going to come over, and I'm going to go right to 0. Now I'm going to hit escape. Once I've done that, I want to make, it's really important, oops, sorry, I'm just trying to zoom the window here. It's really important that I actually get these points at 0 along the y-axis. If I don't do that, then what can happen is that I get overlap in my model, and these really weird artifacts show up. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and use I'm going to hit either the space bar to select, which allows me to select the live selection tool. And this is going to allow me to select a point independent of the other points. And when I select this one point, if I go down to the coordinate manager, or whatever they call it down here, you'll see that along the x dimension, I'm a little bit off 0. So what I want to do is I want to put a 0 in that field, and I want to hit apply. And that'll just nudge this point over. And then I'm going to go down to this bottom point here, and I'm going to set that to 0 as well, because that was also off a little bit, and I'm going to hit apply. Now on the y dimension, it doesn't really matter if it's going below y. I could raise that up, but I don't really care because that's all going to be hidden inside the model of the inside the body of the squid. So I've got this object made. Now there's this other issue here where, most eyeball lenses actually have more curvature to them than this. So I'm going to select this point here, And one of the issues is this is a hard corner, so I don't have handles, so I can't adjust it. So one of the ways I can manipulate splines, and we'll go into this further in more modeling demos, but if I go up to this mesh, sorry, to spline, and I come down here, these are all my spline tools, right, that we have. There's also add, remove, clone, move. Tangents is the one that we want. And what tangents do is you can either do a hard interpolation, which is like a hard corner, or a soft interpolation. So if I click on this, I'm going to get handles, and I'm going to get, I'm sorry, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, but it's also going to make this curvature look kind of strange. If I now switch to the move tool, I can click on these handles and I can start to move them, but they are locked together. If I hold down Shift, when I click on one of these handles, I can break the handles apart. So this way I have a curve, but I'm able to move this. Now, if I hold down Shift and click on this, okay, good. Sometimes when a handle or a spline is directly under the axis, it becomes problematic to grab, but it seems like maybe in this version they've actually fixed that. So now I can make this actually overlap this a tiny bit. I could go through and continue to fix, you know, some of these curves and the way that this thing is shaped if I wanted to, but I'm going to say I'm pretty happy with that for the time being. Okay, so I've got my basic shape. So now what I need to do is I need to make this spline a child of a lathe object. So I'm going to go up to the Extrude tool, and I'm going to go to Lathe, and then I'm going to drag this spline into the lathe. Now, if everything is happy and the way it should be, it should look something like this. So let's go back to our perspective view. And you can see that from that one thing, it's created this round object that looks like a really blank staring eye at this point. So I want to show you what happens if you accidentally have a point on your spline at the wrong spot. So if I select this one point, if I pull this over, do you see those artifacts? That's basically because you can imagine if this whole thing's rotating around the center at the y-axis, right, the green line that's coming up here, anything that's hanging over this side is overlapping with the other side, and you get these really weird artifacts. And that becomes really problematic, especially with transparent materials. So that's why you always want that to be perfectly on center, right? These points can be anywhere. The other thing is you don't want these points to, although sometimes it doesn't, like right now it doesn't seem to matter, but as soon as if I start pulling this in this other dimension, you can get some pretty cool effects and spirals and things with it. But it's going to make some serious changes. So if I undo that and look at my Gerard shading lines, this is something that I found that students often have issues with, is they accidentally move one of these points in the wrong dimension, and their model looks really different. I mean, so you can do cool things with this, but it's something to note that it can cause like really strange behavior if you're not aware of it. So you just want to make sure that if you're modeling in the front view, one of the things that can happen, and we should talk about this right now, the reason that this happens is sometimes people hover over this blue dot here, which is, right, it is that other axis of motion. And so if I click on this and drag, it is going to pull this forward or backward in the Z dimension. Even though I can't see that happening, all I see are the changes now because I have this geometry here, right? And so if I was to let go of that and go back to my perspective view, you can see that it's all twisted and offset now, right? So be really careful about that. It's so easy to think like, oh, I have to click on the dot to move it, when actually you just have to click on one of these arrows to move it in the 2 dimensions that you want to. Okay, now that I've got this set, I'm going to rename the lathe I, and I'm going to select the I, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to hit the letter V on the keyboard and go to Projects and go to Squid. And then I'm going to paste my eye into the scene. And the eye is enormous. So I'm going to make this, I'm just going to say it's probably 0.1 is the right scale. So again, if for some reason you're on the Object tab or something, go back to your scale. Let's do 0.1 and 0.1. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the Move tool to move this object so I can actually see it. I'm going to go ahead and rotate it, probably 90 degrees, more or less. I may change that in a little bit. I'm going to hit the letter E to go back to move. I'm going to pull this right here. And maybe I even want this to be smaller unless I want it to be like a one-eyed monster. But I could make this, let's go and go back to my eye, and I can say 0.05, 0.05, and 0.05 in my scale. Oops. I did 0.5. There we go. That's a much more manageable size, right? So it's 5/10 of the normal of the scale of what I had modeled. And then I'm going to go ahead and rotate this a bit so that it actually lays on the surface of the object a bit better. And I'm going to make sure that it's pressed in enough. Something I could do is I could increase the scale a little bit in the Y direction if I wanted to make it just a little bit thicker. Or I could go back in and adjust the model, but I'm going to leave it set the way it is here. I'm going to hover over the red arrow. I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to click and drag to create a second eye. Squid don't have eyes set like this usually, but we're just going to pretend that they do for the sake of making this a little bit easier to model. And I'm just going to continue to move, and I'm just switching between the E and the R key, the move and the rotate key, until I get this aligned in a way that seems to make the most sense in terms of making this thing look good. Okay, and so, you know, these eyes are not perfect on here, but they do look like they are intersecting with that thing. If I hit the letter H, I can frame this entire model. If I turn off the Gerard shading line, so it's just Gerard shading, I might be able to see some of that detail a little bit better. Right? These eyes are kind of silly, and this whole thing is ridiculous. But right, so at this point we've learned how to use the sweep tool, how to use the lathe tool, and how to use the loft tool. The last thing I want to show you, which we're just going to create another object and create an extrusion. I have no idea where or how you would want to apply this. But the way Extrude works is you create a spline, and I'm going to go ahead and, I guess we could create a sandy bottom or something like that, but let's just go ahead and create something that's a solid shape. I'm going to create this end side, and this thing is huge, and I'm going to leave it huge just because this is an example, and I should have made a better demo that shows you that have a practical use. But I'm going to go ahead and create an extrude object, and I'm going to drop the end side into the extrude. And what that does, as you can tell, is it creates a solid object based on the end side, and it extrudes it back from the object. So if I click on the extrude object and go to the Object tab, in those projects, in those settings, I can come over here and this offset is set to 100 centimeters by default. If I make that longer or shorter, I can change how deep this extrusion is. The direction is set to auto. I can set it to go in a different direction, right? So right now it's actually extruding it sideways. You know, if I do Y, it'll extrude it up and down, right? But it's totally flat. If I go to Z is what the auto would be in this case. It basically looks at the spline that you've created and determines which direction you probably want it to be extruded in. If I go to custom, that allows me to actually set it so that I have, maybe I want 100 in the Z direction, and I want 100 in the Y direction, right? So instead of just extruding it in a straight line, it's extruding it up at an up and back. And if I do X, Y, and Z, right, it's up back into one, up back into one direction. And this is really impossible to see right now, so let me zoom out a little bit and let me go to display, garage shading lines. There we go. That makes it a little easier, right? And so, so I can create this extrusion based on that shape. If I go to the caps tab in the attributes manager, I can uncheck start or right and leave the end cap, or I can uncheck start and end to create a tube. Right, and so one thing Extrude doesn't have is that it doesn't allow you to do something where that sweep does, where sweep allows you to have the shape change in scale along the length. You can't do that with the Extrude. The Extrude is meant to be very, very simple and clean. And that is what I got. Okay, so for the next tutorial we're going to look at polygon modeling, where you actually start from scratch and build something from a small set of polygons to create a complex model. Polygon modeling gives you the most freedom. It's also the most technical and time consuming. Sometimes it's best to start with primitive, start with splines, and then you can make those editable, and then you can continue to work on those using some of the polygon modeling tools. But so that's the next thing we're going to learn. So I won't see you, but I look forward to you hearing me next time.